Later in the show, we'll be chatting to the Liberal MP Nicole Flint, who has had one hell of a week and has become the latest symbol of the left's war on conservative women. Rita, you've certainly been at the receiving end of that. A lot to chat about here, but let's kick off, Rita, with the Women's March, this March for Justice, so-called, at the beginning of the week. Talk us through it.
Well, yes, these marches across the country, they were supposed to represent all Australian women, speaking for all Australian women, putting to voice this deep rage that we are all supposedly feeling, and yet I don't agree with that sentiment, and I would put to you that many Australian women would challenge that sentiment, that they feel helpless, that they are filled with rage about what's happening in this country. And I think it was quite disturbing to see so many very young girls holding up banners about revenge and banners about politicians being called misogynists and rapists. And this movement is important. Their message about the treatment of women, workplace harassment, violence against women, all those issues all Australian women care about, but it has been utterly hijacked by political forces who just want to use this issue to smear the Morrison government, to smear Scott Morrison as a misogynist, and to have this as a reason why the government is chucked out. And I think that only does the cause disservice, because this should be above politics.
Well, James, smearing Conservatives as misogynists worked for the Gillard government. The only thing Julia Gillard did that anyone remembers is that misogyny speech, and that was as fraudulent as much of what's gone on since. I agree totally with Rita. I think there was a headline in the Herald Sun, I think it was, where a young girl was saying, "Mum, I'm angry all the time." Now, I hope that mum turned around and said to her little girl, you don't need to be angry. You don't need to be angry, because the life you are living, that you grow up into, is better than virtually any woman has ever had, ever, on the existence of this planet. And that's, of course, we can always do better. But the reality is Australia has a terrific place for women and men, for everybody, of all races, creeds, genders, to grow up in. And this idea that a young girl is angry because she feels threatened by misogyny is a disgusting result of the Gillard years, James.
Yeah, and I worry a lot about a lot of the messaging that's being sent, I think, to young people around this, especially young women. Absolutely, there are some serious problems in Australian society, as there are in every society, over men and women, everything from mistreatment and discrimination to far more serious matters like assault. But this message to young women that, you are victims of this patriarchy that has to be overthrown and all of this, I think that that's not helpful. But I also think it's not helpful when the people who are organizing the march are doing so, A, so nakedly politically, and B, with very little in the way of actual concrete solution. I think most men are really men of goodwill. I think people want to do what they can. They want to improve relations. They don't want to see women, their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters, their mothers, anybody that they know mistreated. And so they're willing to listen. But, I went through the 55 recommendations, Rowan and Rita, of the sex discrimination report, which came out last year. And about 48 or 49 of those recommendations, so all but 7, I think it was, were basically all about, well, we're going to fund this group to take data on this thing and then give it to another group. And it just seemed like a kind of a big research, HR department thing. Exactly. And there were only very few things, only when you got to the very end, that seemed like real practical solutions. And I think that if there was some sort of practical thing that, you could say, men, we need you to do X, help us.
Rita, help us out here. Rita, help us out. What are the practical measures?
I tell you, well, I mean, one of the things that I would very much get behind is having far more sensible sentencing. So when men are violent towards women, when they do breach intervention orders, when they threaten women, when they stalk women, and those women go to the police, go to authorities for assistance, that there is some real consequences. I have written about this so many times, where men terrorise women and get a slap on the wrist, and it's just not good enough. But that is a state government issue.
That's the courts, though, isn't it? That's the courts. That's not the police. That's the courts. not enforcing.
But the state governments can enforce minimum mandatory terms for a range of things. They can say if you are stalking somebody and you're convicted, there is a minimum punishment for that. So there are
so
things
that's one
that
thing.
state
So
governments can do to increase sentencing.
Is there anything else? Because the only two suggestions we got during the week that I could make head nor tail of, one was out of Britain for a 6 p.m. curfew for men. Now, admittedly, that's following a brutal murder similar to the ones we've seen in Australia of a girl walking home late at night. Now, you can understand that was a Greens idea. It's nutty, but you can understand at least it's a practical solution to a recognisable problem. Similarly, our own police commissioner came up with the idea of an I consent app. Which
that was a mistake.
which tell us about it, Rita. But again, concrete idea, ridiculous. But at least they're concrete ideas,
Ridiculous.
which suggests that there aren't any genuine concrete ideas out there because no one can really identify the problems other than what you've just talked about, Rita. Tell us about the app.
Well, the app is I just can't believe who came up with it, because he's normally a very sensible man who doesn't come up with this absolute insanity. I don't know if he was trying to pander to the woke crowd coming up with this radical solution, but you could drive a bloody truck through the problems with it. I think, thank God he came out the next day and said, yeah, maybe this was the dumbest idea I ever had. But I think there are things you can do to save lives, okay, to have a real impact, particularly when it comes to violence against women. We do know of causes. We do know things like poverty, alcohol abuse can increase the rates of violence against women. We know Indigenous women are 35 times more likely to be hospitalised due to domestic violence than other Australian women. And that is just a national disgrace that you've got one group of women who are so impacted by something that is just destroys you, and you know, women.
But Rita, you're absolutely right. But James, just let me quickly say, they're not the people who were standing up at the March for Justice, and that you're absolutely right to highlight those issues. But what we were talking about was two issues. I don't want to go into the details, obviously, but the two issues that were up front and centre, the Christian Porter and the Brittany Higgins, both involve what started out as two people having too much to drink, apparently, ending up together in a room, and we don't know what happened since. That's got nothing to do with what you're talking about, Rita. James?
But Rowan, you know, the thing that Rita talks about the consent app and also talks about the alcohol. One of the things that we also talked about before was all the young women who feel really angry. And one reason we know they do is that they feel like, you know, at these parties they go to, that, you know, people get drunk, people do things that they shouldn't, and it causes a lot of problems for people. Now, I think also one thing that we could do is make it a lot more, put responsibility on parents of teenagers, young people who are hosting because they want to be the cool parents of these parties, in whether it's the eastern suburbs of Sydney or anywhere else where kids go, they get drunk, they go off, they do whatever. Bad things happen in those circumstances, and parents think that they're being good and responsible parents by letting kids party in their own homes. They're not. I would like to see also maybe the law start to come down on that sort of behavior, because I think irresponsible parenting, particularly when these sexual assaults of young people are taking place under the watchful aegis, allegedly, of parents, that needs to change as well. That might be something that our police commissioner, Mick Fuller, would want to have a look at.
Rita?
And as a woman, I would love to see girls feeling more empowered to be more confident. I think one of the really damaging aspects of what we saw, and like you mentioned, Rowan, the girl saying, I feel angry all the time, a girl in a school uniform feeling angry all the time. That's no way to be looking at life and growing up when you've got the good fortune to be living in Australia, where you've got every legal protection as a woman, you've got every opportunity. You're not in Saudi Arabia, you're not in Sudan, you're in Australia. And to make girls aware of just how brilliantly they're doing, from primary school to university, they dominate the boys academically. Women have outnumbered men at Australian universities since the 1980s. Now, let's actually celebrate that and actually have women have the confidence to not put up with disgusting behaviour and to call it out, whether it's happening to them or others. Of course, men should also do that, but I think That is empowering, when you actually take a stand for yourself, and if someone does something wrong, you put them in their place, you have the confidence to do that. And I think that is we should be teaching young girls, rather than having them grow up thinking they're going to be victims their whole lives, that they're going to have these insurmountable hurdles.
When they're not having nightmares about how evil all men are, they're having nightmares about the planet's about to explode or whatever it is in 12 years' time. I pity the younger generation. It's tragic what our education and our culture is doing to them.